One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.
Men's basketball success over the last number of years has been certainly a big part of the story of your all's revenue growth. And since you arrived, external revenues have actually doubled, which is pretty significant. But I'm really interested in, as you guys forecast your coming potential of driving revenue dollars, whether it's fundraising or sponsorships, which vertical has the most immediate upside and why?
Well, it's always fundraising. I mean, it's like shaving and recruiting. You got to do it every day, right? I mean, we really focus a lot on it. Obviously, the Learfield stuff has been great from us from a multimedia rights perspective, and the Siegel Center ticket is great too. I mean, that grows incrementally, obviously with small ticket increases. But we're sold out every night for 88 straight games now. I mean, it's not like we're going to have a huge growth in that, but the fundraising part in development's been really good for us, and it will continue to grow. We have some big capital projects coming up, which is really exciting. But the thing that I really like the most is we've really changed our culture from being a transactional giving culture to a philanthropic giving culture. And that, when I first got here, it was strictly transactional. And you either gave to get these seats or you gave to get this benefit, and that's all it was. And we've really changed it, and that's helped our growth significantly. I mean, we have people now believing in what we do and believing why we do it and wanting to give to the bigger picture causes to make a difference in student-athletes' lives. And, we've continued to grow our development area every single year, significantly grow. And we have a huge upside, I think, to that still for more growth as we get more former student-athletes involved, and we get more sport-specific giving, and we do different type of projects that we're doing, certainly from a capital perspective. You have donor-based seating is great, but it has a finite number, and especially when you have a finite number of seats, and we're not changing the number of seats in the Siegel Center. It's great to have one less seat than you have a person to put in it every night. It's terrific. But from a fundraising perspective, we've really changed our culture, and it's just provided huge dividends for us, and I know that will continue to grow in the future.
You mentioned getting former student athletes engaged, as before they even leave the institution, of course, as part of that dynamic. And it's a topic that seems to be pretty important and hot around the nation on how to do that best. What are some practices you guys are executing to make sure even before a baseball player or a women's soccer player walks off a campus that they understand the importance of giving back to the university over time?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It really starts when they are student athletes. Number one, you have to make sure they're having a terrific experience and make sure that they feel that you're invested in them, so they want to be invested in you. And we've worked really hard to make sure our student athletes have an incredible experience. But then I think the part of it is the connectivity. Like, how are you getting them involved? How are you getting them to appreciate donor stuff? Like, we have a dinner every year in September with our donors and the student athletes who receive scholarship from those donors. It's a terrific event. I mean, but we have the student athletes understand what the giving part means to them directly with the people who give. And we have the students involved in that and speak at the event and all that. So I think that part is important, having them understand while they're on campus why those things are important. And then when they leave, it's staying connected. And schools make that mistake a lot. When a student athlete leaves and he or she isn't playing professionally, but they're starting their careers, you still want them connected because they're going to be good donors for you down the line. And I think that connectivity is critically important. And we've started doing that here a lot better now that we have our own. Last year was the first class that we've had that were seniors last class of seniors that were freshmen when I was here. So it's worked really well, and we've just kept people connected. And part of it is you have to forego the high dollar amount for a little bit for participation, but those folks are going to be so invested in it down the line, it's going to work out really well. And I've sort of done this at different places, and it's worked. And I think the other part of it is the student athletes and former student athletes have to have ownership of it. So, having a student athlete alumni board, having student athletes who are key volunteers for you, organizing events, things like that, that's critical. That's critical, even if it's just that they want to get together and be around their generational friends. It's important. I think sometimes schools focus on a sport alumni event, when realistically, you probably have a baseball player who dated a soccer player who was friends with a lacrosse player who was, it goes across different sports. So bringing back generations is just as important, if not more important, so people want a reason to come back to your campus and be a part of what you're doing.
Yeah, I agree with virtually every step of what you just walked through. And as a former baseball student athlete, you mentioned UNC Asheville, but that's where I played baseball a decade ago.
Nice.
I can certainly already see in my generation of guys that, we're in our younger to mid 30s. Some guys have really started to make some money, but at times there can be a disconnect when I say, hey, they're working on a turf project at UNCA. Like we need to ante up for this thing because we need to create a better place than what was there when we were there. That's part of our responsibility. And there's a wait, I need to give money now. So that's starting when you're already a student athlete might overcome that hurdle. I mentioned at the front of this interview that I wanted to talk a little bit about self-review and internal review. And the context here that I have in mind is I read, I can't remember, maybe it was in Fast Company, and this was a while ago. I think it was Jack Welch, former GE head honcho. He said, every year around the holiday season when I'm flying back home, and who knows, he was probably like, in the Maldives for the holidays or something. But he said when I'm flying back home, I use that opportunity every holiday to go, okay, what did how was my personal performance this year, and how can I recalibrate for the coming year? So I want to ask how you kind of think about that with your own personal performance, if there's any a real framework you use to judge yourself. And I know you have probably an annual review with your president and that sort of thing, but more in an informal fashion, how are you trying to track your own performance throughout a year?
Well, I think self-reflection is probably the most important thing an AD can do. Being able to sit and have an honest conversation with yourself about how you're doing, how you're spending your time, what the experience of the student athletes is like, how your coaches understand that your level of investment in them. I think that's critically important. I'm sure every AD would say, well, I'm really hard on myself. But do you take the time to figure out why you're really hard on yourself? Do you write things down? I do a lot of, once a week I sit and just kind of clear my head and write for a little bit. But it's always focused on our goals and how are we getting closer to our goals. In a very positive way, but you have to have some time to think. Like I didn't do this great, and how can I do this better? It's the goal part is easy, right? I mean, it's sort of one of those. It's sort of like running. You either run fast or you don't, and the clock doesn't lie, right? You either hit your goals or you don't, because in athletics we have all numeric goals. I mean, it's very, very easy. But there are certain things from a performance perspective, like are you doing a lot of self-evaluation? And I do it weekly in a lot of ways, but then I spend time at this time of the year and at the end of the year, end of the fiscal year, just trying to make sure I recalibrate and say, what are the things that I can do better? Obviously, we do 360s here, and those are really, really helpful. The 360 reviews, we do those every other year, but those are super helpful, just to try to get feedback from your staff of how you're doing things, and from donors and from coaches and from student athletes. But I think those things are really important because you have to kind of set the goal, right, and write it down and have it be clear and present every day. But if you're not thinking about it and not thinking how you're working towards it, you're going to get towards the end of the year and say, well, we didn't come close to that. And how I think how you can get yourself regulated to do that on a daily basis is critically important. When I was younger and I was an AD, I didn't want to necessarily have that self-reflection because I didn't necessarily have the confidence to do it with myself. But now I really understand how critically important it is. And I'm a very goal-oriented person, a very numbers, black and white person with it. But if I don't take the time to say, how can I be a better leader? How can I serve my staff more? It's not going to make the staff better because I can only lead them better if I'm better at what I do.
Is that literally pen to paper, or is that on a computer? What's the application?
I'm an old school guy, so it's pen to paper. I mean, I can make my iPhone work, and I can use Microsoft Word and Google Mail, but that's probably the limits of my technology ability. So I'm a pen to paper guy, and I think when you have to sit and put pen to paper, it makes you think more. It makes you be more careful with how you're writing things. And if you can just delete things right off the paper with a computer, it kind of gives you an easy out not to be honest. But once you put something down in ink, it's there. And I think it forces you to be honest with yourself.
And that's today's One Question, brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. One Question is designed to give D1 Ticker subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences. One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.